Welcome to IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Hello, and thank you for watching IT Pro TV, helping you learn wherever you go. I'm your host, Zach Memis, as we continue on with CompTIA A+ 902, and we're going to be talking about troubleshooting theories. CompTIA's troubleshooting theories. The person bringing us that theory today is Wes Bryan. Wes, good to see you, sir.
Hey, man, thanks for having me back. That's right. We're going to be looking all at, well, a method to the madness, right?
Yeah.
No, just kidding here, but do keep in mind that what we're going to be looking at, just like Zach said, is CompTIA's troubleshooting theory. And you'll probably, if you had to ask a few of the techs there at, the smart minds at CompTIA, they would say, hey, you know what? This is a baseline that we have set for the exam, and we definitely want you to know it. But more importantly than just knowing our troubleshooting methodology is that you do have a method to tackling problems, right? And that will hopefully lead to the solution, right? And the quickest solution, if you will, or an expedited solution. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a quick solution. Some problems are a little bit bigger than others. But the point is that you do tackle every problem with some kind of tried and true method. Now, we're going to dive into a 6-step method that CompTIA provides, and they do want you to know for the A+ exam. Now, I'm also going to let you in on a little secret too, because in Network Plus, for those of you maybe that are thinking about going further in your education here, and maybe we're going to go from CompTIA's A+ into Net Plus, well, guess what? You're going to see this troubleshooting theory again. So one of the things that I want you to think about is that you learn one troubleshooting theory method, and it helps you across 2 certifications. So again, if you are going through Net Plus as well, right, and you are sitting any of those exams, it'll be very beneficial. Now, what I mean beneficial by knowing the troubleshooting theory is that I really want you to memorize, and yes, I do mean commit to memory, the steps that we're going to talk about. And I want you to know them forward and backwards. Now, that is not something that I'm just sitting here telling you just so you could pass a certification, or suggesting, I should say. I'm definitely telling you here, well, you're listening to it, but it's more of just a suggestion. It's something that I actually did when I was studying for A+, when I was studying for Net Plus. And why do I say that? Well, there's a good possibility, and ladies and gentlemen, again, I say it time and time again, I've seen plenty of the exams, but I don't know what's going to be on your exam. They have such a large bank of questions, and these tests have just been, the integrity of these tests are just really, really well maintained, and they do randomize a lot of the questions, and the fact that the questions that I get aren't going to be the questions that you get, wouldn't be the questions that Zach would get when you sit the exam booth. And that's why I say memorize the adjacencies of the ideas, because it's about learning the concepts. It's not just about memorizing questions and answers. You have to know the concepts. Because what they might do on the exam is they might put you into, I don't know which step. Let's just say theoretically. You're in step 3 of the troubleshooting theory. And you need to know, what is the next step that you apply in the scenario that they're giving you, and you have a series of answers to the questions, and you have to know what is the next step. The other thing that they might do too is, because CompTIA does have multiple choice, not just multiple choice, but multiple right answers to a question, right? We say multiple choice, which means you got one choice out of 4 to 5 possible answers, right? You have things like drag and drops where they have a list and they say, pick these out of the list. Well, it's not going to be just one right answer. It's going to be a multitude of answers that are going to complete and make and represent a complete solution. Well, on the exam, when it comes to the troubleshooting theory, they might sit you in one portion of that troubleshooting theory and say, what is the best next step? What is the most likely next step? What is the next couple of steps? Each answer represents a complete solution, right? There are questions like that. Again, they do a really, really good job of maintaining the integrity of these exams, and it means that you have to make sure that you are prepared. So that's what we're going to go into today. And that was probably a few minutes of a little side road there, but I really think, Zach, when it comes down to it, it'll help them for the exam.
It's important, and there's an order, and there's a logical order to everything, and that's what we're going to do right now.
Most definitely. So let's go ahead, and I've got a little diagram here that we're going to talk about, and we're going to go through it. I'm just going to kind of run through the list, rapid fire, and then what we'll do is we'll come back and we'll spend a little time in each one of these, right? So you can see here are the 6 steps to the CompTIA troubleshooting theory or troubleshooting method. All right, very first one's identify the problem. We have establish a theory of probable cause. Question the obvious. We're going to come back because that is a very big parenthesis statement that not only do you need to apply for the exam, but you should be applying in the real world too. And I've got a little bit more to expand on that. Test the theory to determine the cause, right? Establish a plan of action to resolve the problem and implement the solution. All right, then the second to last one, verify full system functionality and, if applicable, implement preventative measures. Again, we've got some that's something that I'm going to go in a little bit farther to when it comes to preventative measures too. And then last but not least, document findings, actions, and outcomes. And I can tell you right now that this last step is sometimes overlooked, and it is one of the most important steps. They're all important, but this is definitely one of the most important steps to making sure that a problem that you have a solution to does get finalized, because it isn't finalized if you haven't documented the whole process, or at least your findings, I should say. All right, so let's go ahead and we're going to dive into the first one. We're going to talk about identifying a problem. All right, when we talk about identifying a problem, understand that it comes down to questioning the end user. All right, now, in questioning the end user, there are techniques that you can use, right? And one of those techniques is going to be to ask open-ended questions, right? The reason I say that is because close-ended questions don't give you a lot of information that you can gather if you're trying to identify the problem, right? If you would ask anybody that's maybe an investigative reporter or maybe an investigator, right? Maybe it's a PI, maybe it's a detective at your local law enforcement agency. You're going to notice that they probably come with a bundle of questions that lead them and leapfrog them into other questions or possible solutions, possible theories. They give them more information, right? So Zach, if I say, this morning, did you wake up?
Why, yes, I did.
Okay, so that, and that didn't really help me. I mean, yeah, right? There's my close-ended question. All right, but I say, how well did you wake up this morning, Zach?
Well, actually, I woke up, went back to sleep, reset, hit the snooze. It took a while.
Right. So now we've got a little bit more information, right? That it was a maybe a little bit of a rough morning or a little rough start to the morning there. Maybe I'm thinking in the back of my head, maybe you had a hard time getting to sleep last night. Maybe a little caffeine in the afternoon just to kind of keep him up and kind of kept him going towards the night, and that's maybe a little reason. Or maybe it was a great movie. Maybe it was that next installment in the latest series. But you notice how all these things are kind of coming up in my mind, right? That I can start to basically expand a little bit more. I got a little bit more information. Now, I don't want any more information than that, Zach. Hopefully you're doing well. You're doing well. But the point is, the first question didn't really tell us much about Zach's morning, right? It just, well, he's awake. We could see that, right? That'd be like my grandpa said. I'd say, Papa, you doing okay? He goes, my heart's still beating, ain't it? Right? Well, thanks, Papa. That really didn't tell me how you're doing today. But, right. So, again, one of the big things is asking the user questions, right? Identifying, open-ended questions, not just yes and no questions, right? Ask questions that also allow the user to expand a little bit more on what the problem is. All right, remember, we're looking at a problem. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's the cause of the problem, right? We also have to identify whether those are symptoms too, symptoms of an underlying cause. And we'll get to that here in a second. Some of the other things that we need to keep in mind is that, they say identify user changes, right? User changes to the computer, right? Well, this is pretty important. I would actually say in the first step, this is on the appropriate part, the latter part of the first step, because there's some other things that you can do as well. You can tell the end user to sit down at whatever the issue is. Can you recreate the problem for me? Can you show me what the problem is? Right? Can you recreate the issue here so I can kind of see what's going on, right? If it's a hard drive that isn't, maybe the operating system isn't loading up. Maybe they're reaching over, they're pressing power on the power button, right? And the computer comes on and it blue screens like we've seen in other episodes. Well, if I can kind of see what they're seeing, if I can see some of the frustrations that they're going through, right, and I can witness it myself, I can might start to formulate maybe what the probable cause might be. Maybe start writing down some additional information. Remember, we're going detective here. All right, some of you are probably too young to remember who Columbo is, but man, I tell you what, right?
Columbo.
Absolutely, Peter Falk, right? When we talk about Columbo, we sit there and think, just one more question, ma'am, just one more question, right? He always had an additional question because he was trying to formulate and see that bigger picture, and it is important, right? Here's one of the another one of the things to keep in mind too, right? Determine if changes have been made. All right, have changes been made to the computer? Because sometimes changes for better or worse can cause problems, right? Especially if you get an end user in there. And again, we're not going Nick Barnes here. We're not being the IT guy that says, just step back from the computer, ma'am, or sir, just step back from the computer. You shouldn't be using a computer at all. You don't even have the IQ power to turn it on, right? I'm not talking about that. Just make sure, are there changes? Have changes been made? Did somebody reach around back of the computer and turn the little adjuster switch on a fixed input power supply, right, from 110 to 220, and now we're underpowering the machine, right? They thought maybe they're doing right? Maybe they unplugged the power cord and plugged it into one of the power strips, and the power strip's bad, right? Find out is it a software configuration? See, that's the other thing too, is keep in mind if things have changed, is it a hardware change? Has somebody tried to install a new piece of hardware recently? Have they uninstalled a piece of software or hardware, if you will? Are there configuration changes that have been made? Are there reconfiguration changes that have been made? All right, give you an example. All right, you have an update. Windows Update comes through. A Windows Update kind of blurs the line between software and hardware because if I update a driver, remember we've talked about drivers in other episodes. Yes, it is a piece of software, but it is a piece of software that's the translator between my hardware and my software. And if it causes a problem, we have problems on both sides of the river. All right, so keep in mind that sometimes some of these blur the line, right? And if that's a reconfiguration of the operating system and the driver has an issue, now we don't talk to the hardware, and now we got to figure out which side, again, it's going to fall on. All right, and again, is it a software fix, right? Or is it a software change? And again, this could be an install of a piece of software that becomes problematic. It could be an uninstall, and maybe somebody uninstalled an application, maybe they didn't even realize it. Maybe in uninstalling one piece of software, it took another piece of software that was actually bundled together. Like, for instance, you uninstalled the Office suite when the only thing you wanted to get rid of, maybe you thought, was like OneNote. For whatever reason. I'm just not picking on Office by any means. But instead of just uninstalling one piece of the software, you uninstalled everything. Could be an uninstall. Could be a reconfiguration as well, or a configuration problem. Then we get into things like, for instance, firmware. Firmware is another one that, like patches, like Windows Update, that the firmware, right, it's not quite hardware, not quite software. That's why they call it firmware. It sits in between, right? Firmware, again, is things like your BIOS, your UEFI system. Has that been updated? Has that been reconfigured? Did somebody boot into the BIOS, manage to get in there and disable a device? Now we've got firmware that doesn't allow you to talk to the hardware, which doesn't allow the operating system to even know it's there. And we got a whole myriad, collection, if you will, of trouble. So again, keep in mind that identifying the problem is definitely something that you have to take into consideration. The other thing that I would say to take into consideration, again, is end user experience. Because depending on their level of experience, you have people that, because they do have a little bit of know-how, they think they can fix things and they can't. But then on the other hand, you got people that know they can't fix anything, so it might not be that big of a deal. But again, just determine what the user experience level might be. All right. The other thing, too, I would say in identifying the problem is identify the symptoms of the problem, because that can help you to formulate solutions. Is it slow performance, right? Is it an internet connectivity issue? If it is, does it happen to be malware, right? Again, I don't know what the cause is yet, right? But is it malware? Is it the fact that they just didn't pay the bill to the ISP, the internet service provider, and the internet's been shut off? I've had that happen before, where they didn't realize they were set up for auto payment, right? And it really wasn't their fault, and it wasn't the ISP's fault either, but they were set up for auto payment. It just happened to be that the auto payment renewed in a portion where they hadn't been paid yet. And when it went to renew, well, it was past the deadline, and the ISP did one of those hard kill switches, soft kill switches, where they just turned it off. Tell them, hey, check out your account, make sure your bill's paid. We want to find out because it looks like the computer, everything is good here. You don't have any malware, you haven't done anything wrong. There's no configuration error, so it's got to be on the ISP side. And you find out, well, I mean, I guess technically it's on the ISP side, but they just didn't pay the bill. So again, you can, is it reboots? Is it shutdowns? Right? Could be overheating. Could be a power issue. So again, keep in mind. Identify the symptoms of the problem. The other thing that I would say too is determine the frequency of the problem. And this is problematic in and of itself. And here's why I say, is it an intermittent problem or is it a consistent problem? Right, we talk about memory issues, right? We talk about troubleshooting the physical memory, and physical memory, because of its random access nature, certain cells might go bad on a memory chip, and you only find out that there's a problem when data is sent to that memory address. But when it's not sent to that memory address, you don't even know that there's a problem, right? In fact, it's kind of interesting, Zach. I was talking to one of the people here. We have a great studio here, a lot of good people in here. And one of the things we have is a coffee shop in here. And one of the things I was talking to is a lady at the coffee shop, and she was talking about her poor car. I guess poor her. Starter issues, right? Starter works, and then it doesn't work. She takes it to the mechanic tests it, and it's working fine at that point. Mechanic says there's nothing wrong with the starter, we can't find anything. Takes it home, won't start. Takes it back. Finally they say, well, we're not exactly sure if it's right or not, but we'll go ahead and we're going to replace it. So she pays for a new starter and hasn't had the problem since. But notice that it was an intermittent problem, right? You know the check engine light that comes on only when you're away from the mechanic shop, but then you go to the mechanic shop and they have the diagnostics, they plug it in and say, everything's fine. And the moment you pull off the parking lot, out of the parking lot from the mechanic shop, the check engine light comes back on, kind of like a little gremlin in the background taunting you. Right, so find out if it's intermittent or it's consistent, right? If I'm pushing the power and it's not until I need a lot of processing power that it shuts down, versus if I'm not putting, I don't have a lot of applications open up, I'm not really stressing the system, it stays on and running just fine. Could be an overheating issue. Could be the fact that you're not noticing the problem until the heat rises inside of the system and the thermal temperature sensors and the thermal management system shuts everything down. All right? Is it time of day? Does it happen to be an internet connection? Because it could be, again, time of day. Could be the fact that, hey, I got very, very slow performance on my internet, so I got to have a virus, and you realize that the person's getting on the internet when it's prime time. Here in the East Coast, right? Could be 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Everybody's getting off of work. Everybody's accessing the internet. And guess what? If you're on shared bandwidth and you're sharing your piece of the pie, guess where your pie is going? Probably to somebody else's table, or at least not you're sharing with it. So, off hours, peak hours, these things also keep in mind. All right. Now, when we talk about identification of the problem too, identify the scope of the problem. And here's what I say. This is one that gets kind of tricky, and I've had to do before, especially in an enterprise. A lot of times it's more it's on the home user side, but it's also more sometimes problematic when it comes to the enterprise side. All right. Is it a single user or is it multiple users? Right? If a single user can't print to a printer, it could be a permissions issue, but if I have more than one user that can't print to a printer, it could be the fact that the printer's turned off and it's affecting everybody. Here's another one, and here, is it a single computer that's having the problem? Because as an A+ technician, you might just be working in a tech bench that you just have single computers come in. But if you are help desk tier 1 or tier 2, for an enterprise level environment, how many end users is it affecting? And at how many PCs? Is it multiple users logging into a single PC? Because that would isolate that the machine's having a problem, or is it multiple users on multiple PCs? Because that would indicate a network problem. Right? Now here's where it, and again, that's where it gets a little tricky, right? When you have a single machine versus multiple machines, a single user on a single machine versus a single user across multiple machines. All right? So there is no right answer or wrong answer. So you have to, again, ask the open-ended questions, right? It goes right back to the very first thing that I stated, right? And here's where I tell you the don't do's. We've talked a lot about the
do-do's.
The do-do's, right? I was just going to let you throw that one in there, Zach, but I have to follow along on that one.
I have 5 kids.
I've got a couple myself. I was going to say, I can only imagine that one's going to make it to our blooper reel.
Do what I say, but don't do as I do.
That's right. So here's some things that I want you to worry about, try to keep out of your troubleshooting process. Don't assume anything. all right? Assumption sinks ships. Don't assume you know what the problem is. Don't interrupt the end user when they're trying to tell you what the issue is. Don't jump to conclusions. Those three things are something that you have to make sure, all right? Now, I will tell you that one of the things that they also call out in this step, I'm going to tell you what I want you to know for the exam, and I'm going to tell you the real world, okay? Because they might change a little bit, all right? Again, one's more opinionated, and I'll tell you where it's opinion versus what will be on the exam. What will be on the exam is identifying the problem. They also talk about question the end user, identify user changes to the computer, and perform backups before making changes, and they put that in identify the problem, all right? I want you to notice the verbiage on this. Perform backups before making changes. If you haven't made changes, then you don't need to do this step right now because you need to still find out what you think the problem might be. All right? Before you test anything, which will be some steps coming up, that's the third step to be more specific. That's when you make sure that you have backups, right? Because at this point, you don't even know if you have backups. You don't even know if you can perform backups. If I have a failed hard drive, how can I perform a backup? I haven't even got to that part of trying to identify the problem. I don't even know that the problem is a failed hard drive at this point. I don't even know that the drive is corrupted or if we can obtain and run backups. That's an opinion, all right? Understand what I just said, there's opinion. All right, so I would say go a little bit farther in finding out the problem to determine if you can even run backups, all right? Now, if it's time sensitive and you know you don't have much time, you run backups, right? So just be careful because even in if you have a power issue, even in turning on the machine to try to run a backup could be detrimental to the system and any data that's on that hard drive. If it's time sensitive, you pull the drive out of the machine and you take it to a company that does data recovery and you recover the information, then you can run your backup. So again, I'm differing a little bit from the exam. I want you to know the exam puts in identify the problems, run backups before you perform any changes. But as you'll see, as we go through this list, you shouldn't be making any changes yet at all. So that should come a little bit later, all right? All right, so that is the very first step. A lot in that first step, all right? I realize that, but it is good to have a nice foundation, all right? Now, the next one that we're going to talk about is establish a theory of probable cause and question the obvious. Now, I did say, Zach, on that last one, when we first did the quick rundown, right, and we said we'd come back and we'd address each one of these individually, is question the obvious. All right, now, that one might not be so obvious what I mean by that, right? Or what CompTIA means by that. And I love the fact that CompTIA puts that in there because it is a very overlooked point, all right? So I go up to an end user's computer and they can't send an email, all right? First thing I should be checking, do you have an internet connection? Do you have a cable plugged into your machine?
The obvious.
Right, exactly, yes, question the obvious, all right? I don't have anything on my monitor. Is the power turned on? Now, you might sit there and be sitting back going, that's pretty silly, Wes, but you don't realize how much that can help. Keep in mind that you might not be physically looking at the machine at this point. And I've actually had some people tell me, actually one of the other hosts. One of the other hosts told me one time that he was helping somebody do some troubleshooting on their computer, and so they needed to reboot the machine. He said, you know what, reboots, gosh, in computing, for whatever reason, seem to fix a lot of the problems. I'll take a random guess. Probably 80% of your problems can be fixed and solved by a reboot, and you didn't need a certification to do it, okay? However, one of the things that he said is he would tell the person to reboot. Now, understand, mind you, Zach, this is before we had solid-state drives. I mean, they were out there, but you certainly weren't going to find them for anything less than like quite a few $100s in a machine. So we're not talking about very, very fast restarts here. We're still talking about mechanical drives, and he would tell the person, okay, reboot your machine. And they would do just like this, right, real time. Reboot your machine. Okay, it's done. He'd say, wow, that fast. All right, let's go ahead and we'll reboot the machine again. Go ahead and reboot the machine. All right, it's done. So he was stunned at what the heck was going on, right? Trying to figure out, what is this computer from the future here? Because it is so fast. Found out that the person was just reaching over and turning the monitor on and off. Right? Right? So understand, again, that goes back to the first part. Don't assume anything, right? Question the obvious. When you're identifying the problem, first and foremost, don't assume anything, question the obvious. I tell you what, it can save your bread and butter when it comes to troubleshooting, right? If I don't have power on the machine, do I have the power cable even connected? All right? I've seen that before. I don't have power. Okay, so can you look at the power connector and can you tell me, is it plugged in? Is it plugged into we call it a rat's tail, right? The power strip? Yeah, it's plugged into the power strip. Is the power strip turned on? Look at it. Power strip is turned on. Okay, here's where I messed up. I didn't practice what I preach here. Power strip didn't have a lit light, or the light itself isn't lit. It's just a plastic solid. It's just a plastic button. It has no amber light in it like some of them do, red lights in them, right? So since it wasn't illuminated, is the way I should say, the person couldn't tell, and I didn't think to ask, is it even plugged into an AC outlet? So the end user did exactly what I said to do, and it wasn't their fault, but it was my fault for assuming the power strip was actually plugged in. And because the light wasn't illuminated, I wouldn't have known. All right. The other thing that I've also seen is the fact that a power strip has a fuse breaker on it sometimes, because they're called surge suppressors. They're not, we'll talk about this coming up in another episode, is the fact that it's more just like a fuse that breaks. And you got to push in the fuse, right? It keeps an overvoltage from happening within a certain point. Lightning strikes, it does what it wants. But all right, so understand, simple fixes first, right? Keep in mind that when you are establishing a theory of probable cause, one of the things that they do mention and call out, love this one as well, if necessary, conducting external or internal research, all right, based on the symptoms. Now, external resources could be going to the manufacturer's website, could be going to forums like Tom's Hardware is one that is absolutely great. Overclockers Club, you might be thinking, well, I'm not a gamer, I'm not overclocking my computers. No, but gamers really know their computers. They've come up with problems. They've peeked and tweaked and tried to see everything that they could get out of their computers, so they've probably come through a lot of problems, which means they've also come through a couple of solutions, too, to keep those machines running. So there are forums out there that are great. I highly recommend them. And again, we're not making any money by saying something like Tom's Hardware or something like Overclockers Club. It's what we use, right? So go to forums, external. On the internal side, right? If you don't have the training and don't know what the issue is, don't hesitate to ask somebody. Ask somebody. Ask somebody to help. I'll be the first one to say, if my 4 eyes can't fix it, I'll find somebody else who has 4 eyes, right? Zach, well, you only have 2 eyes, so I don't know if I want Zach.
Well, that's debatable.
So, but I wouldn't hesitate. Hey, Zach, hey, I can't figure out what's going on with this. Can you just come over here and take a look? Because maybe I didn't question the obvious. Or maybe somebody's been through that same situation and says, oh, yeah, I actually went through that a couple months ago on this other machine. Here's what I did. All right? So definitely conduct your research as well, right? So if it's a hardware, is it a driver issue? Don't overlook the fact that it could be just a driver issue. Don't overlook that if it's a hardware issue, is it a connection issue? Simple connection, the hard drive, computer isn't booting up. What'd you do recently? Well, I put in another drive. Really? Did you hook up the power cable? Did you hook up the data cable? Did you turn the interface on the motherboard on in the BIOS or the UFI? I don't know, but at least we should question it, right? Software, again, goes back to the experience, the user experience level. And again, this is not cutting anybody down. It's just the fact of the matter that somebody might not be able to send an email because they don't know to click the send button. And again, not talking down to anybody. You have to be willing to support your end users, and you have to meet them at their experience level, right? And that doesn't put yourself on a pedestal. The moment you put yourself on a pedestal, trust me, you can be knocked off of it really quickly, just by circumstance alone. Configuration, if it's a software issue, yes, malware could have been something, could have been an uninstallation, right? Could be a permissions issue. right? But remember, what we're doing is we're looking at the cause, and the cause usually has some kind of problem, right? We need to know what the underlying root cause is, right? The symptoms or the problem is the computer isn't booting. That's the problem. That's not the cause. The cause could be the fact that you don't have power, could be the fact that you have overheating, all right? Malware. Malware is a big one. Malware is the cause, but we also have to determine, is the end user doing things that they shouldn't be doing on their machine in order to get the malware, right? So there are other things that we have to think about as well. Now, I know, Zach, we only got through a couple of these bullet points, but it does look like we are running to the end because, well, I talk a lot. But at the same time, we want to, which hopefully isn't a problem in troubleshooting, but it does look like we're going to have to go into a part 2 on this one.
Well, and that's okay because we are troubleshooting CompTIA's troubleshooting theory. This will be a part 2. This has been part 1. As we continue on with CompTIA A+ 902, lots of great video in this series. Please watch all of them. You'll be so glad you did. Excellent job, Wes. And thank you for watching IT Pro TV. Remember, a good IT Pro is always learning. I'm Zach Memis.
And I'm Wes Bryan.
And we'll see you very soon.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.